All aboard! Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, football fans of all ages, I am Beast Mikey. You have now arrived at my train of thought. It's time to go into the power rankings as we close out the 2024 season and go into the 2025 off season. Obviously, with the Super Bowl loss, I was 9-4 overall when it came to my playoff picks. Solid year, not the normal playoff year I seem to have, but the Eagles earned the Super Bowl. I will obviously get to them and the Chiefs in the title tier portion of this vid. But the inspiration for the tier names this week comes from the NBA trade deadline and all the chaos and the mayhem that happened because of it. There were 4 legitimately top 30-ish type of guys that were traded for either each other or traded into different spots. And I'm going to have the tiers based off of where I think they're going in the present and the future. I mean, the teams is where I'm describing this as. Let's get to business with the Dallas Mavericks zombie tier. I think this Anthony Davis trade is going to end disastrously. It's already started that way. Davis plays one game with the Mavs. He didn't even play the entire game. He was good, very good, and then gets hurt. Very hurt, and now he's going to be out for almost a month. Yikes. Plus, he's already going towards mid-30s, and for that matter, Kyrie Irving is too. This could be a disaster for Dallas. Anyway, New England. Season's worst win. So this was a disaster class of a you have one job type of thing for the Patriots, where you win and you can get a Chicago Bears level King's ransom for a team that's desperate for a quarterback. You probably could have got the Bears trade plus some other stuff if you so chose and so wanted to. You opted not to, and you won, and now all of a sudden you're picking 4th, and it's on the board you don't get Travis Hunter. It's on the board you don't get Abdul Carter. At least one of the two should be there. It's on the board that you should take McMillan. I honestly think that's the route you should go. Or take one of the offensive linemen, also in play. But this win cost you a whole lot of other draft capital for the future because your roster is probably, I would say, a good 2 years away from competing for a playoff spot. New York Giants, second worst win. You were New England, but worse. You could have got your quarterback and you lost to the Colts. And instead, you did not lose to the Colts. Drew Lock had a career day, and now you're picking with the prayers of hoping the Titans or the Browns don't take a quarterback, where one of them has to not take one, but if they both do, then you're out of luck, and this is a 2 QB draft. You're picking 3rd. Yikes. Optically speaking, this might be the worst season a team has had in a long time. When you consider your best player goes to your chief rival 90 minutes down the road, they have great success, which obviously we know what it was. He has the greatest season of his career, and you needed to get the number 1 overall pick in a 2 QB draft. You didn't get the overall number 1 pick in a 2 QB draft, and now you're hoping and praying that one of the teams that can take a quarterback don't take a quarterback, and they both need one. One of those teams is Cleveland. Just draft quarterback. You have a chance to have a mulligan. Deshaun Watson's probably not playing next year. You need to not play him ever again, unless it's dire straits with injuries. And there's a 2 QB system, and you're picking 2nd. You somehow got lucky because of the Patriots and the Giants not tanking when they absolutely needed to tank. Ward or Shedeur. You might have your choice if the next team I'm going to talk about opts not to take either of them. Tennessee, Carter or quarterback? The argument seems to be made that Abdul Carter is the number 1 player in this draft. It's him or Travis Hunter if you're talking position by position, I would say. So I actually agree with this. But Tennessee really needs an edge rusher. They could afford to go sign a vet, maybe. But what do you do if you're Tennessee? Do you just take Cam Ward, who they seem to love? Or do you take Abdul Carter, who you may desperately need, even though this is a pretty decent edge rusher class? What do you do if you're Tennessee? Jacksonville, AEW storyline. The Liam Cohen situation just felt wild, where he interviews with them and then doesn't take the job right away, says, you got to get rid of Balky for me to even consider it. And they wait a few weeks and they push the price up. They get rid of Balky and then they finally hire Cohen. who makes it for the second straight year. Baker Mayfield loses his offensive coordinator. This time, it's to the Jaguars, the enemy up north, I guess, if you're Tampa. Well, then again, most teams are north compared to Tampa in the NFL, but I digress. Jacksonville's situation's a mess, and I don't think it's just the play calling. The defense needs overall just a talent infusion outside of its two really good edge rushers. Mason Graham's on the board. Either of those offensive linemen are on the board. You did hit a home run with Brian Thomas, no question. But for Trevor Lawrence and that contract to really make sense, he's going to have to improve, and the Jaguars are going to have to improve around him. New Orleans, more cap casualties? So the Saints may be regretting not keeping Zach Bond. Maybe his emergence and breakout is partially Vic Fangio and partially right place, right time, but not having Bond and not getting the most out of him just did not work. The Saints are, once again, the most cap-strapped team in the NFL. They're $55 million over the cap, of course, because aren't they always? Which means restructuring and, simply put, an aging roster that needs to be younger and needs to get younger fast can't really improve. They're picking way too late to get the elite S-tier type of guys in this draft. They need help in a lot of different spots. Is Derek Carr really their guy? Can Kellen Moore help him become the guy that they paid him to be? It's a mess. This whole situation is a messy one. They needed to blow it up, but I think needed to be where the Browns or Titans are drafting, and somehow won too much and are not where the Browns and Titans are drafting. Another team that needed to be that high was Las Vegas. Gonna watch? It feels like the Raiders are going to be one of the teams SOL on a QB in this draft, and instead pivot and go free agent class first and sign one of the either Sam Darnold or maybe Kirk Cousins, see if they can revive him and keep him somewhat healthy. It feels like they're going to be one of those teams that finds a way to get a veteran QB as opposed to drafting a rookie. And even still, they may draft a rookie in rounds 2 or 3. It just feels like it needs to be that way. I don't think they'll Falcons it, where they sign Kirk Cousins or Sam Darnold. How ironic would it be if it were Cousins? And then draft a QB with their first round pick in the top 10. But a Raiders team and a Raiders franchise that's always been impulsive, I don't think anything's off the table with them. My prediction, if I had one, would be that the Raiders end up going the vet QB route and they skip on a QB altogether and maybe draft one in the middle rounds. And the New York Jets, Bills due soon. What do I mean by this? The bill on the fifth-year options on Garrett Wilson and Sauce Gardner, they're going to have to decide that pretty quickly, and we'll see what they do with it. Also, what do you do with Breece Hall? His contract is up after this season, and he's going to require some payments. He's a good running back, and it feels like not paying him would probably be a mistake. What do you do if you're the Jets in these regards? Are the trade Garrett Wilson rumors true? What do you do with Devontae Adams? Are you going to flip him for other picks? And I don't think they're going to get the price they got the price they gave up, I should say, when they traded him away. What do you do if you're the Jets? I do like the coaching hire. Aaron Glenn looks like he's going to be a legit piece. Even though the Lions were undermanned on defense, they seem to get some things right towards the end of the season. So I do wonder what the Jets are going to do with this offseason, which is a very critical one. And, of course, the elephant in the room of the whole Aaron Rodgers thing, and they're not letting him come back. The Jets are another team that may be SOL on a rookie quarterback. What are they going to do with the veteran spot? They could do the funniest thing ever and sign Sam Darnold back. But is he still seeing ghosts? More questions that will need answered. Let's go to the Golden State Warriors fork in the roads here. I think the Warriors are the only team amongst the four that I'm going to mention, obviously with this Jimmy Butler trade, that aren't title contenders now, nor are they in the future. The Mavericks could be a title contender, maybe, but Golden State I don't think really is. Steph Curry is still very good. Jimmy Butler is still very good. I just don't know if they have enough around those guys. And yes, they should go for broke while they have Steph still at close to peak of powers, but it just feels like they're not going to have enough to deal with the monsters that are young in the Western Conference over the next few years. At least you cause the worst sports breakup ever to actually break up when it came to Butler and the Miami Heat. At least there's that. Chicago, build O-line. You got the home run coach hire in Ben Johnson, similar to how the Jets did with Aaron Glenn, but better because Johnson was the belle of the ball. And now you got the offensive mind to go with Caleb Williams, and you have obviously offensive weapons to go with Caleb. Can you build this offensive line and have them not get destroyed? That would be quite nice. Also, can you learn from your mistakes of passing on Jalen Carter and rebuild the defensive line? And the defense as a whole, not named Jalen Johnson or Montez Sweat. You have two really good pieces there, but question marks almost everywhere else. Chicago's kind of in a make-or-break season in the division of doom. I don't love your chances, unless you get almost everything right. Carolina, actual optimism. The Panthers feel like a team that if they made the playoffs in a year or two, even next year, it wouldn't shock me. I wouldn't be mad at it. I would completely understand. Bryce Young took some real strides, and that was impressive to see. That was good to see. Now, obviously, Carolina is going to get healthy on the defensive side of the ball, getting Shaq Thompson back, getting J.C. Horn healthier, getting their best defensive player, Derek Brown, back. That's going to help them immensely. They clearly do need a number one receiver. I think Legette's fine. I just don't think he's a one. I think he'd be an excellent two. There is a golden opportunity to get a one in McMillan from Arizona, but you might get sniped because the Jets could do it. It's a vital offseason for the Panthers, and one where they aren't complete trash anymore. That's good to see. Dallas, bad coaching search. This could have been handled a whole lot more effectively and a whole lot more efficiently. Why didn't Dallas just hire Al Harris? Harris, I thought, was probably the best coach on Dallas' staff. He had two guys get 10 NOs in the last 3 years. How hard is that to do? Yeah, Diggs get 10, and then Bland get 10. I don't love either as cover corners, and they're great feast or famine guys, but the fact that he had two guys take the ball away at that proficient of a level, and Bland get 5 TDs in his 10 NO year, and he's not your head coach? He's in Chicago instead? I somehow don't love this. I think that's going to be a heavy, heavy loss. Never mind losing Mike McCarthy, who's a pretty solid offensive coordinator and offensive mind. Obviously, he's calling the plays as the head coach he was. But I think losing Al Harris is going to hurt a lot more than losing McCarthy because of the way his defenses just took the ball from people. Dan Quinn as well, but we already saw that. So what do you do now, Dallas? Getting Eberflus as your DC seems hilarious, and I think you got trolled enough for it. Is he going to become the solid DC that he was back when he was with the Colts? And Brian Schottenheimer, have you learned anything from what's just happened? Is Austin GT destined to be a Cowboy? These are questions I need answered. Speaking of the Colts, Indy's next. Who's QB1? It's obviously not going to be Flacco, but is it going to be Anthony Richardson? What do the Colts do? Do they sign a quarterback in free agency? Do they trade for one? Do they draft one to compete with Richardson and keep the rookie contracts? Indy's got a really good roster aside from quarterback. I don't love Pittman as a wide receiver one, though Alec Pierce played pretty well. Jonathan Taylor's obviously very good. Their offensive line is still relatively solid. Defense, pretty good. Zaire Franklin, probably the best guy on it. But I need to see the defense probably have one or two more guys pop on that unit. Otherwise, I think Indy's really good to go. And they almost survived, Russian roulette their way into the playoffs last year, except for one disastrous day for Joe Flacco. That was not great. Arizona, Murray's last year. This is the last year of Kyler Murray's contract that's obscene financially speaking. They can get out of it in 2026 with a minimal dead cap hit, which kind of puts the pressure on Kyler Murray, who started fast, like he seems to do, and then crumbled in a non-Cliff Kingsbury collapse because he wasn't there to help with the collapsing. Arizona's got pieces on offense, obviously. I think we all saw this offense flourish and ball out. The defense needs work and needs work now, not named Budda Baker. I do need to see what Arizona can do in this draft where they're not drafting super high now. And again, with Kyler Murray, is this his last year as a Cardinals quarterback? San Francisco, Purdy price. This is kind of twofold to me. Obviously, the Brock Purdy bill is now due. What do you do if you're the Niners in this situation? Do you pay him or do you let him ride and go and take on a brand new quarterback situation? What do you do with Dre Greenlaw, who's a free agent? What do you do with Deebo Samuel, who's requesting a trade, and the Niners are letting him seek out a trade partner? What do you do with Hufanga, who's been a very good safety, often injured, but a very good safety? The Niners are one of the more intriguing teams that didn't make the playoffs because that roster was so good and had so many different injuries over the last year. Are the Niners a product of 2020 and an aging team? Or are they the product of, okay, 2020 was just a down year like 2024 was, and they're going to be back right in contention as they get healthy? Seattle, good roster, but the QB situation for the future is concerning. Geno is stable, but I don't think he's more than that, and I think that's the big concern here. A roster like that needs more than a stable quarterback, and I think that's kind of unfortunate for Geno Smith. I like him. I think Geno Smith is a very capable piece. I think he can absolutely get you 10 wins like they did, but it just feels like that's their ceiling, and that's pretty unfortunate. The rest of this roster is legitimately good. 2 legit running backs, 3 legit receivers, tight end that's stable. The O-line can be a little better, but overall not trash. The defense, pretty solid with a lot of youth and some experience. I like this roster. Just needs the quarterback to be high, more than low ceiling, high floor, which is, I think, where Geno is. And Cincinnati, Chase and Higgins. The bill's already due for Higgins. The bill will be due for Chase, and that Chase bill will be much higher than Higgins' will be. The Bengals waited too long to pay either of them, and they're going to pay a heavy price for not doing it. I don't love where Cincinnati's spot is. This is a roster that wasn't already great to begin with because the defense, not named Trey Hendrickson, and a couple of the linebackers, wasn't all that great. This is a real concern. And for a team that needs to make a move in the 25-26 season with Joe Burrow and company, that roster has to improve ASAP for them to really make that jump. Coming up next, the San Antonio Spurs playoff tier. I don't think the Spurs, and they are my favorite NBA team, I don't think the Spurs are a title contender now or maybe even next year. I do think they're a playoff contender, certainly. I do think they're a playoff contender for the 25-26 season. They may get in the playoffs even now. I just don't think they're a title contender until, I would say, 26-27, when we can really understand who around Wemby and De'Aaron Fox are going to be the guys. Those are the things I'm most looking forward to as a fan. They still have some holes on the roster to fix. They need some backup center help, which I think they got Bismarck Biyombo for the time being, and they could definitely use a 3-and-D guy that can be more stable than what they currently have. But I do think San Antonio, in due time, will be back in the playoffs. It's just not back in the title picture quite yet. From my favorite NBA team to my favorite NFL one, Miami, revive or relocate. This to me is about Chris Greer and Mike McDaniel especially. Now, yes, the previous 2 years, the Dolphins made the playoffs. They had a decent 9-8 year, just considering Tua's injuries and the concussions, and then had a 11-6 year where they were the best offense in the NFL, and we saw them at full power for most of the year, until the very end when they couldn't hold the AFC East lead. Now, last year, obviously, Tua's concussions in his hip were major setbacks. Okay, sure. And I think it's justified to say, okay, maybe things aren't working with Greer. I get the disgust in the fan base for why Greer kept his job. But I personally think he and McDaniel should have a right to fix their problems. I think they should have a right to fix their issues. What are the issues on this roster? Easy. The offensive line interior, which we as fans complained about for many years now, has to be fixed. The guard spots especially. We don't have the starting guards on this roster. 2 of them have to be found. Free agency or draft, one or the other or both. 2 of them have to be found. Other positional needs. I think a power back. I've said it for 2 years now. This team needs thunder. This team does need a culture change in terms of its toughness. I think a power back would be vital. and going with a power run game to go with Achane. I think that would be a huge deal. And a red zone receiver, a tall receiver, really. There's one I love in this draft in Higgins from Iowa State, but I'll get into that when I do Miami mock drafts. That's coming up later on this offseason. I would love to see on this defense some other things. I think the linebacker core is fine. I think Green did a good job with that. The D-tackle spot, if Calais Campbell decides to retire, that would also be nice. And then you got to fix the safety spot ASAP. Javon Holland I would keep, but if you cannot pay Holland, which I'd understand because I think he would be overpaid if he got top dollar on the market, I think the safety spot has to be fixed immediately too. There are some holes here, but I think it's a fixable roster. Restructures are obviously coming. We know this because of the contracts they've already paid. But this is a roster I think that can be fixed. It's just a matter of whether McDaniel and especially Grier can get them fixed. Pittsburgh, drafting QB. Right? So the Steelers are a good roster, I think. The offensive line is a little spotty, and their explosiveness is very spotty, not named George Pickens and Jaylen Warren, but I think the Steelers are a good enough roster to make it happen, especially with a high-end defense. Yes, the cornerback room could use either some helping or just improvements internally, but I think the Steelers are in a decent spot. That quarterback situation has to be fixed. And I'm not sure if stopgaps are the answer. If I'm Pittsburgh, I'm probably just drafting a quarterback and just moving along with him. Continue to build the offensive line a little bit, somewhat. But just draft a QB and just move along and try to develop him. I think that's the route Pittsburgh should go. Atlanta's already done that. They're next. Penix era begins. That was a falconing of epic proportions to see them fall apart that badly, that quickly, after sweeping Tampa Bay. To lose the division at the very end is really hilarious that the Falcons falcon like this. For Mike Penix, I liked what I saw in the 2 games he played, but I need to see this Falcons team take some more steps. Can you please get a pass rusher? You need one in the worst way possible. And I think Atlanta is in a bad spot when it came to Abdul Carter. Wrong place, wrong time to not crumble earlier. And I would like to think Atlanta could get this pass rusher situation. If I'm the Falcons, I may double up on this. Get one in free agency, get one in the draft. I would just feel better if I were the Falcons in doing that. I do think the offense is stable. Penix and Bijan/Algier and Drake London. I like what you have here. You have some pieces. Ray McCloud played pretty well. Like they got pieces on offense. Offensive line is still pretty good. But the defense needs help. And in terms of a pass rusher, and maybe in terms of another corner, aside from A.J. Terrell. But this defense needs some pass rushing and maybe help on defensive line in general to help Grady Jarrett out in the worst way possible. Can you please do that, Atlanta? I'd feel much better if you did. Tampa Bay. Cohen chose cash. For the second straight year, Tampa Bay will lose their offensive coordinator to another team. And in this case, it's Liam Cohen going to the other feline brother from 1995 in the form of the Jaguars. Obviously, they lost their OC to Dave Canales. They lost him to the Panthers last year. So now what do you do if you're Tampa? I think we've established that Baker Mayfield is probably a top 10 quarterback. I think after all these years, Baker Mayfield has found his place. Good stuff. That defense needs help. And it's a sink or swim for Todd Bowles. I've mentioned for several teams, some things need to be changed that could be changed. What about Bowles? Is Bowles' situation going to be changed? I need to know. This defense could use some fixing and could use some help. I like some of the pieces, yes. Winfield, obviously. Vita Vea, obviously. Yaya Diaby and Kalaji Kancey. I like some of their pieces. But the defense, maybe it's just the coaching, needs some sort of improvement. Minnesota, great season, but a terrible ending. And now it's a matter of a question. Is it Sam Darnold? Are you going to keep him as a bridge for JJ McCarthy? Or are you just going to cut to the chase and go with McCarthy? Will McCarthy be healthy enough to roll fully by the time we get to draft time and or training camp time? I would think yes, but what are you going to do if you're the Vikings? A 14-win season where everything went so right, until week 18 in Detroit. And then things went so bad in Detroit and then in Arizona when they played the Rams because of the unfortunate circumstance of the wildfires. What do you do if you are the Vikings? I do think Minnesota's got a good roster and obviously a good offense. Keeping Brian Flores as defensive coordinator is a huge boom. But I think the book's kind of out on Flores as well because, let's face it, whenever there's a big game against a good offense, the Brian Flores defenses don't do well. They had a minimal shot because of Darnold laying an egg against the Rams, but that's just what happens with Flores teams. Whenever that defense has to play a good offense, they seem to crumble. It's not great. Houston, Slowick or offensive line? What a difference a year makes. This time last year, Bobby Slowick was a head coaching candidate. It was believed that he was going to be the guy that was going to be the hot guy, the hot coaching search on the market. He was going to take over somewhere. He's going to, put his spin on a team that desperately needs offensive improvement. And then this year happens, and things go kind of south. The Texans offense takes a step back. CJ Stroud takes a step back. One could argue that it's because of the offensive line being really bad and not having Stephon Diggs or Tank Dell or Nico Collins at different points in the season. That, to me, is the argument here, is that the offensive line and the lack of weaponry was why Stroud regressed, as opposed to Bobby Slowick's play calling. But they chose to let Slowick go, and now he's in Miami, and could potentially help Tua and company out. Houston has to fix an offensive line in the worst way possible. Laremy Tunsil aside, it's bad. And Stroud was under siege in that divisional round game pretty much the entire time. It may have been under siege from the time they got off the bus in Kansas City. It never got better in the entire game. It was not about officiating, Houston. You lost because you couldn't protect Stroud and your special teams was complete trash. Please fix both of these things. Denver, follow that up. Bo Nix was simply stable. He wasn't outstanding. He wasn't awful. He was just stable. And that's kind of sort of what Denver needed from Bo Nix. Just a stable QB that can make a play or two, and then the defense kind of take care of its business. Denver definitely does need to be more explosive. I like Marvin Mims. I like Cortland Sutton. They need a tight end in the worst way. There's a really good one. We'll see if he falls to him. His name is Tyler Warren. He was only the best tight end in the country last year. And Denver's defense, rock solid. PS2, Defensive Player of the Year. And he earned that award. He should have been the pick for that. Great years from Nick Bonitto, who was also a top 5 to 10-ish defensive player last season. Zach Allen had a great breakout year in Denver. The Broncos' defense is good, legitimately good. Sean Payton is legitimately a good coach and probably the right one for Bo Nix. They made good decisions there. Denver's on the right track. I do need to see them get more explosive on offense and figure out who the RB1 of the future will be. I'm not sure he's on this roster. I do like what the Broncos can be, though. I do think Denver has got some pieces and can roll. They may be fighting for second with the Chargers. What's next? So, this was as bad of a playoff game as I could remember one team having in the wild card round. It wasn't Dallas bad where they got humiliated by the Packers, but this was pretty ugly to see your most important player, in this case the Chargers, Justin Herbert, crumble as badly as he did. 4 NOs, one of them was a pick six, one of them could have been another pick six, and the Chargers completely botched what would have been a really golden opportunity to jump on Houston because they just could not score on offense. It was not great. And now we go to a situation where the Chargers are kind of in a little bit of a limbo. It's a pretty decent roster. It just needs more help, especially for Ladd McConkey in the offense, because Quentin Johnston ain't it. I like their physical run game. I think it's good. It's just they aren't as explosive as they probably need to be. A little concerning. And now let's get to the LA Lakers title tier. Now, what separates to me the Lakers and the Spurs as of now is that the Lakers, I think, can win the championship this year considering where they currently are. They need to not see Denver in the playoffs. Otherwise, they are doomed. They don't have enough size to compete with Nikola Jokic or Aaron Gordon. They're in trouble there. They may be in trouble against Oklahoma City because of the Thunder's overall depth. That may also be a problem. Yes, Luka handled business against them last season, But this Thunder team is an entirely different beast, and I'm not sure that they can handle what OKC is going to bring their way if they see them. Almost everyone else, I think they're in okay shape against when it gets to the playoffs with Luka and LeBron. But against those two teams, Denver and OKC, I think there is no way forward for them except for running into a dead end. Anyway, let's get to the title tier. Washington, this year's Texans. Team from, and literally bar for bar, it seems like this year's Texans. Houston had the second pick and then drafted CJ Stroud. CJ Stroud went ham and absolutely dominated, winning Offensive Rookie of the Year easily. The Texans get to the divisional round. They take care of business. No shame in them losing to Baltimore. They just were ready. Grand opening, grand closing. What happened this past year? We saw the Commanders' second pick, Jaden Daniels, sets the world on fire, and probably Venus and Mars also on fire as well. They go to the NFC Championship and somehow beat Detroit. They take care of business in Tampa before that, and they were overmatched horribly by a far better roster in the form of the Eagles. With exception of winning an extra playoff game, that's kind of what they were. They were this year's Texans. Their roster undermanned, their roster undermatched, kind of sort of happy to be there against the best team in a particular conference, and then they lose, and lose horribly. Can the Commanders just get more talent on defense? That's the real question to me. I like what they have otherwise. McLaurin's a really good receiver. They've got talent in various spots on the offense. Their offensive line, though, could use some help. Isn't completely awful. And they simply just need some defensive reinforcements. Upon getting those, they'll have a fair shot to compete once again in the NFC. LA Rams, Stafford and Kupp. The two main offensive reasons as to why the LA Rams won the Super Bowl a couple of years ago, could they both be out? Now, they've already said that Cooper Kupp is going to get traded, and that's Stafford. Are they really still fans of him? I don't necessarily fault him for the divisional round loss with the Eagles. I think that was just unfortunate timing with the snow, unfortunate circumstances with the fumbling, which they were not prepared for. And even then, they were 15 yards away from beating the Eagles. The only unfortunate part was that they could not block Jalen Carter when they absolutely had to. And that's effectively what ended the proceedings. Rather unfortunate. If I'm the Rams, keeping Stafford would make some sense, although also drafting a QB of the future would make just as much sense. I think they have to do both these things. And that offensive line has to get a little bit better, and the receiving core, not named Puka Nacua, also could stand to improve. I don't think the Rams are far off, though. I think the Rams could absolutely make another run in the NFC with Stafford. It may just be one more run, and then they have to go rookie QB. Green Bay needs wide receiver one. This team absolutely needs to get the wide receiver right. And if they could do that, the Packers are in business. This is an overall very talented roster. They also may need a cornerback one because of the health concerns of Jair Alexander. That's another spot that needs to be fixed. Pass rushing, sure, could be useful, but I personally think that they are not too far off either to make a run. Can they? Questions that will need to be answered. I do like where Green Bay's going. There's just more places that Green Bay needs to get to. Detroit. Was Campbell right? A couple years ago, Dan Campbell, right after the NFC Championship loss to the Niners, said that might have been our best shot. And he might have been onto something. We saw what happened this past season. The Lions' entire defense basically was injured. Aiden Hutchinson had a gruesome leg injury, which I'm sure he'll be okay for the start of the regular season, but it was pretty nasty. They had injuries all over the defense. Now, some of the guys came back for the divisional round game, but the defense was never as right as it looked like it was going to be at the start of the year. Now you don't have Aaron Glenn as your defensive coordinator. Now you don't have Johnson as your offensive coordinator. And though this offense is still elite and was the best offense in the league last year, you didn't win a playoff game even with it. Kind of brutal when you think about it. Are the Lions able to stay as good as they were, rebuild the defense to some degree in terms of health and in terms of more talent, because an edge rusher could be very, very nice for them? And can this Lions team possibly duplicate what they just did with new coordinators? And I would imagine a renewed chip on their shoulder, because They did all that to do nothing, and now it's time to redo this all over again. Baltimore, another devastating loss. This is starting to get a little repetitive, where the Ravens have a really good roster. Lamar Jackson playing really well at an MVP caliber level. And then they play their worst game at the worst time, and it's another back-breaking, horrible loss. We've seen this for the last 3 years now with the Ravens since they made the playoffs. Even without Lamar Jackson, Snoop Huntley and company almost, and probably should have, beaten the Bengals, only to fumble at the 1-yard line and Cincinnati steal the game. Last year, AFC Championship against the Chiefs, they run the ball really well the entire year and opt not to run it against Kansas City. They played right into Kansas City's hands and probably lost because of 3 back-breaking turnovers. One of which at the goal line with Zay Flowers, one of which in the end zone with a devastating end on Lamar Jackson, and a back-breaking loss where they had home field advantage against the Chiefs. And then this year, with the grand finale against Buffalo, divisional round, way more talent than Buffalo, one would argue. And ultimately, it was Baltimore's turnovers and drops by Mark Andrews, especially at the 2-point conversion where the game should have been tied. And you lose in a heartbreaking fashion for the 3rd straight year. What do you even do now? Your roster is almost complete. Quarterback can be improved, sure, but aside from that, what do you even do? How do you possibly figure this out? These are questions I need to see answered. And if you don't figure it out this coming season, where do you go from here? Buffalo. Baltimore, but worse. 4 times, 5 years, your season ended at the hand of the Chiefs. 3 times at Arrowhead, obviously, and 1 time wide right 2 in Buffalo. But this one may have been the most devastating, because you went bar for bar with Kansas City, and is it on the board that they could have done better than what the Chiefs just did in New Orleans? Yeah, probably. I don't think they would have personally. I just don't see it because their run defense isn't as good as Kansas City's was. But Buffalo being that close to the Super Bowl and not getting there, what do you even do now with this team? That's the thing I really need to see. What happens with Sean McDermott? Is this his last chance to figure it out and get this done? What happens with Joe Brady? I'm amazed he didn't become a coach now. I'm legitimately amazed he didn't become a head coach somewhere. Is this his last year in Buffalo? Or does he take over for a potentially fired McDermott? What happens there? There are so many questions for Buffalo. Should they win the AFC East? Yes. Josh Allen is definitely the best QB in the division. And if Miami doesn't get their act together, they're going to dog walk their way to the division by Thanksgiving just like they just did. But what do you do if you are the Bills if you don't get this right? As in, get past the Chiefs and get to the Super Bowl. Speaking of which, Kansas City are indeed human. Yes, Kansas City can be had. You can indeed make it happen. You can indeed beat them. They are not invincible. The Tribal Chiefs can be done. And can be done badly if you have a dominant front line. The Chiefs' offensive line, I thought, was good. They had no answers anywhere on that line for the Eagles. And Mahomes had no answers whatsoever. He probably played the worst game of his career at the worst possible time. You just never saw that one coming. What do you do if you're Kansas City? Now, yes, you could use a tight end heir apparent to Travis Kelce if Kelce doesn't already retire. I think the receiving core is going to be okay. As long as you keep Hollywood Brown, you have him for another full year. You're going to get Rashee Rice back, and you're going to, I think, be respectably fine at the receiver spot. I just wonder what else can you possibly do to win their 3rd title in 4 years, your 4th title in 7 years. I do wonder if Kansas City can get back there. And even if they do, they may have to face Philadelphia. Night 2, Cody. Congratulations, Eagles. You finished your story. A dominant Super Bowl win against Kansas City and preventing a three-peat, which would have driven a lot of people mad. Jalen Hurts showed that you don't have to be a generational quarterback to win a championship in this day and age, which I think gives hope to a lot of teams in the NFL who don't have one of the AFC's big 4, who I think are generational guys. Jaden Daniels might be, but I need to see more time for that. Anyway, this roster doesn't have too many holes on it right now. from an offensive line that's still elite to Smith and Brown and Jahan Dotson, who's settled in nicely as a wide receiver 3, to a defensive line that is menacing with those 2 guys in the middle. Maybe an elite pass rusher is the last piece on this puzzle, one could argue. Nolan Smith has shown he can break out, but I think one more elite pass rusher would probably make this defense pop even further and terrorize everybody else. Maybe another corner to help ease the transition of Darius Slay, even though Quinton Mitchell is turning into a CB1 and fast for next season. I do like what I saw from him. Your safeties are straight with Blankenship and Cooper DeJean. Even Gardner Johnson as a third safety, also very good, or second or third corner, depending on where you put him. Still good, all of it good. The point is, there aren't many holes on this roster. They just don't exist. They're just a very well-rounded roster. I don't love Sirianni, but he's earned his arrogance. They got a championship. He didn't crash the car. Good job. Fangio, they're a good defensive coordinator. Things just didn't fit in Miami. They fit now with the Eagles. He did very well. Kellen Moore gone to New Orleans, but I'm not sure it's going to matter anymore, to be honest. I think Jalen Hurts has shown he could be a very good quarterback no matter who the coordinator is, as long as it's not Sirianni calling the plays. This is generally a really good, well-balanced roster, and now it's the roster that everyone's going to try to beat, and everyone should try to beat. The sad thing is, for everyone else, the Eagles are incredibly young, and almost all their core pieces are just now getting to their prime. So there you have it. All 32 teams, and my thoughts on where they were, my thoughts on where they are, and my thoughts on where they're going. I will probably still do the Where Do We Go From Here series coming in March. Give that some time. May do it division by division this year as opposed to 2 teams a day. Makes things a little bit more simple. Anyway, as for what's coming up next for me, Power Rankings, NBA edition. I'm going to start that next week. And when we get to the All-Star break, I'm bringing that content with the NBA. Will it be 5 tiers of 6, 6 tiers of 5? You'll see that when I get to it next week. Also, top 15 games at Sirius. I will do that in 2 weeks. I've already got my thoughts ready to go for that, but you will find that out on February 27th. Power rankings wise, you will find out where I put every team in every tier in the NBA, and that will be my next train of thought.